I still remember the morning of my 72nd birthday, though I wish I could forget it. I woke up with a sense of unease that I couldn't explain. A heaviness in my chest that no amount of coffee or sunlight streaming through my apartment windows could lift. It wasn't just another birthday, it was a reckoning. A moment that would define the rest of my life. All those years of unconditional love, sacrifices I had made without question, the sleepless nights, the financial burdens I had carried silently, it all seemed to crash down on me in that one cruel phrase my daughter, Rebecca, had thrown at me. The best gift you could give me would be if you just died. Those words didn't just sting. They shattered me. I had raised Rebecca with all the devotion a mother could offer, pouring every ounce of my energy and money into her happiness. I had helped her buy her first house, practically raised her children while she focused on her career, and sacrificed the comfort of my retirement for her whims. I had thought that love was measured in sacrifice, that devotion was proven by how much you gave regardless of the cost to yourself. But that morning I realized that all of it had been meaningless in her eyes. She didn't care about my sacrifices, my love, my presence. She only cared about what she could extract from me. The sting of betrayal settled in my bones like a cold, unrelenting winter. I felt anger, yes, but it was mingled with exhaustion. How had I spent decades building a life of devotion, only to be discarded like a broken toy? And yet, amidst the turmoil, there was a strange clarity. A voice inside me whispering that this could be my liberation, that the life I had been postponing for decades could finally begin. That morning, I didn't answer her calls or texts. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I didn't try to explain. I simply decided to leave. It was a quiet departure, almost anticlimactic, but it felt monumental. I sold my small car, packed a single suitcase with essentials, and purchased a one-way ticket to Switzerland, a country I had always admired for its serene landscapes and peaceful lifestyle. The decision wasn't impulsive. It had been brewing for years, a quiet rebellion against the life I had been forced to live. But that day, the final push came from the cruelty of a daughter who had revealed the true nature of our relationship. Transactional, self-serving, and devoid of genuine love. Upon arrival in Zurich, I felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Everything was foreign, the language, the streets, the rhythm of life, but for the first time in decades I felt alive. I wasn't running away from my family. I was running towards myself. I found a modest apartment with a view of the mountains, far from the noise and the manipulations of my past. It was small but charming, filled with light, and for the first time I felt I could breathe freely. The first week was the hardest. Loneliness gnawed at me, the ghosts of past sacrifices whispered in my ears, and every impulse was tempered by doubt. Had I done the right thing? Was I selfish? But as the days passed, I discovered the incredible relief of silence. No demands, no guilt trips, no frantic calls begging for money or approval. Just the mountains, the lake, and the clarity of my own thoughts. I started to explore the city, walking through cobblestone streets, discovering small cafes where the baristas greeted me with warmth, and joining a library that became my sanctuary. Each small victory, each simple moment of independence, built the foundation of a new life I had never dared to imagine. One afternoon, as I sipped coffee at a quaint lakeside cafe, I received a call from an advisor I had contacted before leaving the country. Herr Meyer was an older gentleman, seasoned in managing the financial affairs of expatriates and retirees. He listened patiently as I recounted my situation, the sacrifices I had made, and the cruelty I had endured. He nodded thoughtfully and then said something that resonated deeply. "You are not alone. There are many clients who come to Switzerland seeking a new life after toxic family dynamics. They have chosen themselves, their happiness, and their peace over the manipulation and demands of ungrateful children." His words were a balm to my wounded spirit. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't failing as a mother. I had been trapped in a pattern of exploitation masquerading as filial love. For decades I had confused guilt with duty, obligation with affection. But now, hearing that others had faced similar betrayals and emerged stronger, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could do the same. Maybe I could reclaim the years I had lost to servitude and sorrow. That same week I joined a hiking group for older adults. The group consisted of 8 women and 4 men, all between the ages of 60 and 75, all seeking adventure and companionship in the twilight of their lives. On the bus ride to the first trail, I met Ingrid, a 71-year-old German woman with a sharp wit and kind eyes. As we gazed out at the rolling hills and snow-capped peaks, she asked almost casually, "What brought you here?" I didn't bother to soften the truth. "A daughter who told me my greatest birthday gift would be my death," I said simply, watching her reaction. Her eyes widened, a mixture of shock and understanding. "Seriously?" she asked. I nodded. Completely seriously. After financing her house, raising her children, and sacrificing my retirement for her, she said my presence was unbearable. I couldn't stay. Ingrid's expression softened. "You are very brave," she said. "It must have taken immense courage to walk away after all that." And it had. It had taken years of internal struggle, months of planning, and the painful acknowledgement that my love had been used as currency. But as we hiked together through ancient forests and along sparkling rivers, we shared stories of liberation and newfound independence. Ingrid spoke of her own children, who had treated her as a bank rather than a mother. She had endured emotional blackmail, threats to withhold grandchildren, and accusations of selfishness. Yet, in choosing herself, she had found freedom. Her story mirrored my own. For decades, I had felt trapped by expectations I hadn't agreed to, manipulated by guilt, and held hostage by the very people I had nurtured. But in Switzerland, amidst the serene beauty of mountains and lakes, I began to see the contours of a life that was entirely my own. Returning to my apartment each evening, I faced a barrage of missed calls and text messages. Rebecca and David had contacted me relentlessly, their messages shifting from concern to panic to aggression. "Please, Mom, come back. We need you. The kids are crying," they pleaded at first. Then the tone changed. "The bank called. We can't lose the house. Act like an adult and come back." Finally, desperation seeped through. "No one knows where you are. If something happens, it will be my fault. Just tell me you're okay." I read them all chronologically, observing a pattern that was both familiar and illuminating. Not once did Rebecca acknowledge the cruelty of her words, the pain she had inflicted, or the injustice of her demands. She cared only about the consequences of my absence for her life, her finances, her comfort. It was a lesson in the stark reality of human selfishness, a reminder that the love of some children is conditional, transactional, and mercenary. I decided to respond once, not with anger but with clarity. "I am perfectly fine and happier than I have been in years. What you are experiencing now are the natural consequences of your actions. I hope this experience helps you understand the value of the people you love before it's too late." Her reply was immediate, begging, promising, trying to erase the damage with words. But empty promises do not mend broken hearts. I blocked her number, David's, and even unknown numbers that had attempted to reach me. I closed that chapter with firm resolve. The days in Switzerland became a rhythm of discovery and growth. I signed the papers to reside permanently in the country, transferred my pension, and started exploring hobbies I had long neglected. German classes, watercolor painting, and a book club filled my days with joy and purpose. For the first time, I experienced the thrill of decisions made solely for my happiness. It was a strange and liberating sensation to witness my own life unfolding independently, unshackled from the emotional chains of manipulation. I realized that all those years of sacrifice had not been a measure of love, they had been a measure of exploitation. But now, in this new life, I could finally measure love in terms of joy, freedom, and self-respect. Even as messages and calls from my past continued sporadically, they no longer held power over me. I had discovered something invaluable. That liberation, once embraced, transforms the soul. And in that quiet, resilient freedom, I began to envision a future where my happiness was paramount, where my identity was mine alone, and where the cruel words of a daughter could no longer define my worth. The first morning I woke up in my Swiss apartment, I realized something I hadn't felt in decades: peace. The sunlight spilled through the wide windows, painting the walls with a golden glow, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of anyone else's expectations pressing on my shoulders. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the mountains reflect on the calm lake. It was almost surreal, this sense of freedom, this quiet validation of my choice. For years, I had been so entangled in the lives of my children, particularly Rebecca, that I had forgotten the simple act of living for myself. The phone still sat on the table, silent, blocked from the persistent calls and messages that had haunted my every waking moment. It was symbolic in its quietness, a reminder that my life no longer revolved around their needs or manipulations. I realized that every sacrifice I had made, the money, the time, the emotional energy, had been treated not as love, but as a resource to exploit. And now, free from that, I could finally breathe, think, and make decisions without fear of backlash or guilt. That afternoon, I decided to meet with Herr Meyer again, the financial advisor who had been instrumental in helping me plan this new chapter. Sitting in his office, I felt an unusual thrill as we reviewed my accounts, investments, and the logistics of moving my American pension to Switzerland. It was an affirmation that leaving had been the right choice. "Julieta," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you've done exceptionally well in planning this. Most people your age would be hesitant to make such a bold move, but you've taken control of your life in a way few ever do." I smiled, a quiet, almost shy smile. It was strange to hear someone praise me for prioritizing myself after a lifetime of putting others first. Herr Meyer continued, explaining how the money I had originally invested for Rebecca's home and other family needs could now be managed for my benefit. The idea that I could finally enjoy the fruits of my labor, that my savings could grow instead of being drained, was both comforting and exhilarating. I had long believed that financial independence was impossible at my age, that the sacrifices I had made had permanently tied me to the whims of my children. But now I could see a future in which I was both secure and free. That evening, as I unpacked my few belongings, I felt a wave of gratitude for the simplicity of my new life. No shouting, no demands, no last-minute emergencies or guilt trips. Just quiet, space, and the gentle hum of possibility. I opened a journal I had brought along and began writing. Not about Rebecca, not about David, not about the past, but about my hopes, my plans, and the woman I wanted to become. I wrote about joining the hiking club, taking watercolor classes, learning German, and even dreaming of writing a book one day about my journey from exploitation to liberation. Each word on the page was a declaration of autonomy, a step toward reclaiming my identity after decades of giving it away. The next few days were a mixture of exploration and introspection. I walked along the cobblestone streets, visited small local markets, and began to familiarize myself with the language and culture. The freedom to move, to think, and to plan without interference was intoxicating. And yet, lurking in the back of my mind was the faint echo of guilt, an almost imperceptible voice that questioned whether I had abandoned my children, whether I was being selfish. But every time that doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the words Rebecca had uttered, the truth that had shattered any illusions of love. She didn't value me as a person, only as a source of money and labor. I decided to take a bold step. I would disconnect from all communications with them for a while. It was terrifying at first, imagining the flood of messages, the potential backlash, the judgment from neighbors and friends who didn't know the full story. But the moment I silenced my phone and ignored the incessant calls, a sense of relief washed over me. I was no longer a slave to their whims. I was not obligated to justify my choices or sacrifice my peace for someone who had never truly appreciated it. It was during this period of silence that I met Ingrid more frequently. We became walking companions, confidants, and occasional therapists for one another. Her stories mirrored my own, and her courage emboldened me. We hiked through forests where the trees whispered secrets of resilience and endurance, and over lakes so still they reflected not just the sky but our inner truths. She shared how she had set boundaries with her own children, who had reacted with anger and guilt, threatening to cut off contact with their grandchildren. She had stood firm, and though the first months were painful, she eventually found strength and freedom she had never known. Our conversations often turned to the emotional manipulations we had endured. I realized that for decades I had been confusing guilt with love, control with care, and demands with necessity. Every time Rebecca had called in tears, claiming emergencies or threats, I had rushed to her side, believing that love required constant sacrifice. But now, through Ingrid's companionship and the clarity of distance, I began to understand that true love is measured by respect, reciprocity, and acknowledgement, not by exhaustion and depletion. As the weeks turned into months, I began to establish a rhythm of life that was mine alone. Mornings were for walks by the lake, afternoons for language classes or painting, and evenings for reflection or reading. I enrolled in a watercolor course and discovered an unexpected talent for capturing the subtle nuances of light and shadow on canvas. Each painting became a meditation, a testament to the beauty of a life reclaimed. I also joined a book club for expats, where I met women from various countries who had faced similar challenges, children who exploited them, spouses who had failed to protect them, and communities that had turned a blind eye. Sharing our stories was cathartic, each narrative a validation of our collective struggle and triumph. Amidst these new beginnings, I occasionally checked my blocked messages, curious about the progression of Rebecca and David's desperation. Their communications evolved predictably, from emotional pleas to financial threats to outright aggression. They begged, threatened, and tried to manipulate me into returning, but never once acknowledged the cruelty of their initial words. It was a painful but enlightening observation, confirming what I had always feared. They had never valued me as a person, only as a resource to exploit. One evening, after a particularly long hike, I decided to respond once firmly but calmly for the last time. I am perfectly fine and happier than I have been in years. What you are experiencing now are the natural consequences of your actions. I hope this experience helps you understand the value of the people you love before it's too late. The immediate barrage of messages that followed only reinforced my decision. Empty promises, desperate apologies, and frantic reassurances could never undo the years of neglect and exploitation. It was the clarity of consequence, not forgiveness, that mattered. Within weeks, I signed the documents to permanently reside in Switzerland, transferred my pension, and began contemplating the sale of my old apartment back home. I felt an exhilaration I hadn't known since my youth, a sense of agency and self-determination that had been absent for decades. For the first time, my financial decisions were guided solely by my needs, not the whims of children who had never truly appreciated me. I started attending financial planning sessions with Herr Meyer regularly, exploring investments, and realizing that I could finally secure my future without fear of depletion or manipulation. The freedom to live for myself, to invest in my own happiness, was intoxicating. I began to write in my journal daily, documenting the small joys, the quiet triumphs, and the lessons I was learning. I wrote about the importance of boundaries, the dangers of blind devotion, and the power of reclaiming one's life. Each word was a step toward healing, a reaffirmation that my worth was intrinsic, not measured by the gratitude or lack thereof of my children. The days in Switzerland passed like a dream I had long thought impossible. Each morning, I awoke to the soft light of the Alps filtering through my window, and each evening, I found myself reflecting on the sheer audacity of the life I had claimed for myself. Gone were the frantic calls, the guilt-laden messages, the demands that had weighed me down for decades. My apartment had become a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, create, and live without interference. It was astonishing how quickly peace could root itself once the toxic presence of my children had been removed from my daily existence. The financial freedom I experienced was liberating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Without Rebecca's constant demands and David's instability, my savings began to grow. Investments that Herr Meyer had carefully guided me into were flourishing, providing a sense of security I hadn't known since my earliest adult years. For the first time, I could imagine my remaining years not as a series of sacrifices, but as a chapter of fulfillment, learning, and growth. The concept of living for myself, rather than constantly feeding the needs of ungrateful children, was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. Even as I relished this newfound freedom, a subtle unease lingered at the edges of my mind. What would Rebecca do next? I knew her well enough to predict the escalation of her tactics. She was relentless, cunning, and utterly self-centered, and I understood that her desperation to reclaim control over my life and finances would not be easily quelled. The messages I had blocked continued to flood my imagination, each one a reminder of the manipulations and cruelty I had endured. It was during this period of reflection that I received the first indirect warning of Rebecca's next move. My neighbor Elvira called with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Julieta, you need to hear this," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Rebecca has contacted the bank. She's trying to reverse the mortgage process and reclaim the house." I listened, feeling a mixture of exasperation and quiet satisfaction. This was exactly what I had anticipated. Their dependence on me was so complete that they could not survive without my intervention. I thanked Elvira for the information, quietly affirming that I would not be drawn back into their chaos. Over the next few days, I meticulously prepared for the potential legal and financial battle. I coordinated with Herr Meyer, reviewed all documentation, and consulted my lawyer Annel. Every detail of my previous decisions had been executed with precision. My financial contributions were recorded, my legal rights as co-signer were unassailable, and my residence in Switzerland was fully recognized by both Swiss and American authorities. I knew that Rebecca's attempts to manipulate the system were destined to fail, but I wanted to be thoroughly prepared. Meanwhile, life in Switzerland continued to blossom in ways I had never imagined. I enrolled in advanced German classes, exploring the nuances of the language that had once seemed impossible to master. The act of learning, of challenging myself intellectually, became a source of joy and empowerment. I joined a watercolor course, capturing the delicate interplay of light on snow-capped peaks, the gentle ripple of lakes, and the vibrant flowers that adorned the alpine meadows. Each painting was a testament to my freedom, a visual manifestation of a life no longer bound by exploitation or obligation. Evenings were often spent with Ingrid or with new friends I had met in my book club. The stories we shared were raw, honest, and deeply validating. Women in their 60s and 70s recounted decades of manipulation, coercion, and emotional abuse from their adult children. The sheer scale of these experiences was staggering, and yet in the telling there was an undeniable strength. I realized that I was not alone, that my journey from subjugation to autonomy was mirrored in countless lives. Each conversation reinforced the belief that my decision to leave had been not only justified but necessary. Then one morning a letter arrived from an international number I didn't recognize. Curiosity mingled with trepidation as I answered. The voice on the line introduced herself as Sarah Williams, a social worker from my hometown in America. Her tone was polite but serious. Rebecca had filed a complaint alleging that I was suffering from cognitive decline, that my decision to live in Switzerland was irrational, and that my finances were mismanaged. She claimed that my sudden disappearance had placed me in danger, and that social services needed to intervene. My blood ran cold. This was the first time Rebecca had crossed a line that I could not ignore. She was attempting to invalidate my autonomy and question my mental capacity to manipulate my finances. I responded firmly, outlining my living conditions, my mental health, and my deliberate planning for life in Switzerland. I requested that a formal evaluation be conducted to confirm my lucidity and independence. While the idea of undergoing a medical and psychological examination was initially unnerving, I welcomed it as an opportunity to expose the falsity of Rebecca's claims. It was astonishing how far she was willing to go to regain control over my life, but I was resolute. No longer would I allow her manipulation to dictate my actions or my peace. The evaluations at the American consulate in Zurich were thorough and precise. I met with a senior physician and a licensed psychologist who assessed every aspect of my mental acuity, financial understanding, and independent living skills. After a rigorous 3-hour assessment, the report confirmed what I had known all along. I was in perfect mental health, fully capable of managing my life and finances, and entirely lucid in every decision I had made. The final report explicitly stated that Rebecca's allegations were unfounded, and that any attempt to challenge my autonomy based on these claims would be baseless. Receiving the official confirmation of my mental health was liberating. I knew that Rebecca's next steps would be constrained by the incontrovertible evidence of my independence and clarity. It was a profound moment of empowerment, reinforcing that my decision to leave had been not only necessary but courageous. For the first time in decades, I felt an unshakable confidence in my right to live for myself, free from guilt, manipulation, and exploitation. Meanwhile, Rebecca's escalating desperation continued to reach me indirectly through neighbors and mutual acquaintances. Elvira provided updates. Rebecca had confronted friends, attempted to access bank accounts, and even threatened legal action. But every attempt was thwarted by meticulous documentation, legal preparedness, and the unwavering clarity of my intentions. I began to appreciate the full extent of my transformation. From a woman whose life was dictated by others, I had become someone who commanded respect, boundaries, and autonomy. In the weeks that followed, I took steps to formalize my independence further. I arranged for the sale of my American apartment, ensuring that every financial transaction was transparent and legally secure. I continued to invest wisely in Switzerland, watching my assets grow in ways I had never dared to imagine. Each step was a reaffirmation of my ability to thrive independently, a proof that life after exploitation could be rich, fulfilling, and secure. Amidst these practical steps, I also nurtured my emotional and creative self. I wrote daily in my journal, capturing the evolution of my thoughts, feelings, and experiences. I explored painting techniques that challenged me, joined community events, and cultivated friendships with individuals who valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. The sense of joy, curiosity, and empowerment that blossomed within me was unprecedented, a stark contrast to the exhaustion and anxiety that had dominated my previous decades. Even as I flourished, I observed Rebecca's attempts to manipulate from afar. Her messages grew increasingly frantic, alternating between apologies, accusations, and desperate financial pleas. But I remained resolute. Each unheeded plea, each ignored threat, was a reaffirmation of the life I had chosen. I began to understand the profound truth that had eluded me for years. Love is not measured by sacrifice alone. True love, respect, and care are reciprocal. Exploitation, manipulation, and threats are not signs of affection. They are evidence of toxicity. One evening, reflecting on these lessons, I made a decision that would further cement my autonomy. I drafted a single firm message to Rebecca. I am happy, healthy, and thriving. The consequences you are experiencing are the result of your actions. Your attempts to manipulate me no longer have power over my life. I am living my life on my terms, and I will not return to the cycle of exploitation and guilt. Sending this message felt like the final severing of invisible chains that had bound me for decades. The immediate sense of relief and clarity was profound. For the first time, I was truly free. With the immediate threat neutralized and my autonomy secure, I began to focus on the future. I enrolled in a writing course, determined to document my experiences and share the lessons learned with other women who might find themselves trapped in similar cycles of abuse. I envisioned a book that combined personal narrative with practical guidance, an empowerment manual for older women navigating the complexities of family, finances, and emotional manipulation. Each day I took small steps toward this goal, writing, editing, and reflecting, all while continuing to nurture the creative, intellectual, and social aspects of my life. Switzerland had become a sanctuary where every day offered freedom I had long thought impossible. The early mornings, when the mountains were bathed in soft golden light, became my meditation. I would sit by my window sipping coffee, listening to the distant chime of church bells, and feel an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. For decades, my life had been dictated by the unrelenting demands of my children, Rebecca's insatiable expectations, David's financial instability, and the constant weight of guilt I carried for daring to think of myself. But now, in this serene environment, I discovered the profound truth of autonomy. Living for oneself is not selfish, it is necessary. Even as I relished this newfound peace, the shadow of Rebecca's desperation lingered. I knew her well. She would not accept my absence passively. Through Elvira's discreet updates, I learned that she had escalated her tactics. The bank had been pressured with calls and emails, social services had been involved, and she even attempted to employ legal maneuvers to challenge the mortgage and my decision to sell my American apartment. Each report only strengthened my resolve. For decades, I had been the one who compromised, who sacrificed, who feared the repercussions of standing up. Now, I realized the power of standing firm and why mornings were dedicated to self-improvement. German classes sharpened my mind and allowed me to engage with locals confidently, while watercolor painting brought a meditative joy I hadn't experienced since my youth. I painted the mountains in soft pastels, capturing the reflections on serene lakes, the fluttering of alpine flowers in the breeze, and the subtle gradient of dawn light over snow-capped peaks. Each brushstroke was a celebration of my independence, a declaration that I was reclaiming not only my time but my sense of self. Socially, I flourished as well. Joining the book club for expats became a window into lives similar to mine. The women I met had all experienced various forms of emotional manipulation by their adult children, though their courage to break free often came later than mine. In those conversations, I recognized not just their pain but their resilience. Sharing stories, exchanging advice, and simply being heard were liberating. It dawned on me that the community I had found here was something I had never known in my own family. A support system built on mutual respect and understanding, not obligation and guilt. Then the first official challenge from Rebecca arrived. a formal notice from social services in my hometown. They were investigating her claims that I was mentally unfit to make decisions, and that my sudden move to Switzerland constituted neglect or abandonment. I read the letter carefully, my heart tightening only slightly, not from fear, but from anger at the audacity. This was the daughter who had wished me dead, who had threatened me with emotional manipulation, and now she attempted to strip me of my credibility and independence. I immediately contacted Anil, my trusted lawyer, who confirmed that we were in a strong position legally. Every step I had taken, from signing documents in the presence of witnesses to maintaining independent financial accounts, was solid evidence of my lucidity and autonomy. The evaluation arranged by the American consulate in Zurich was rigorous but ultimately empowering. I met with a senior physician and a licensed psychologist who conducted detailed assessments of my cognitive abilities, financial understanding, and daily living skills. After a thorough 3-hour evaluation, the results were unequivocal. I was in perfect mental health, fully capable of managing my finances, and entirely lucid in my decision-making. The report would be sent directly to social services, rendering Rebecca's allegations baseless. I felt a sense of vindication, not from revenge, but from the recognition that the truth, long suppressed by her manipulations, was finally official and undeniable. Meanwhile, life in Switzerland continued to bloom around me. I explored local markets, tasting cheeses, fresh bread, and fruits that seemed impossibly sweet compared to the rushed purchases back home. I joined a hiking group of older adults, a diverse group of men and women between 60 and 75, all seeking adventure, learning, and companionship. Our excursions were filled with laughter, shared stories, and mutual encouragement. I began to understand how rich life could be when it was lived for pleasure and growth rather than for obligation and sacrifice. One particular morning, as we ascended a trail overlooking a crystalline lake, I spoke with Ingrid, a spirited German woman who had arrived in Switzerland 2 years prior under circumstances similar to mine. We shared the pain of adult children who demanded endlessly yet gave nothing in return. I thought I was selfish for wanting my own life, she confessed. I spent years questioning whether standing up for myself was wrong. Her words resonated deeply with me. I realized that for decades, I had confused manipulation for love and demands for affection. Recognition of this truth was the first step toward genuine liberation. Back at home, I meticulously managed my finances. Without Rebecca's constant financial emergencies, I was finally able to plan for the future. The investments Herr Meyer had helped me make were appreciating steadily, and my Swiss bank accounts reflected a level of security I had never known. I felt a sense of empowerment that went beyond money. It was the knowledge that I could sustain myself entirely, that I could live fully without being beholden to anyone who had repeatedly undervalued and mistreated me. One evening, after a long day of painting and writing, I checked my phone, something I had been avoiding for weeks, and saw messages from Rebecca flooding in. They ranged from pleading to angry, to desperate, each one betraying her focus on the consequences for her life rather than any genuine remorse. She did not apologize for wishing me dead. She did not acknowledge the cruelty of her actions. Her words were purely transactional. She needed me back to solve her problems. I drafted a single deliberate response. I am happy, healthy, and thriving. The consequences you are experiencing are the result of your actions. Your attempts to manipulate me no longer have power over my life. I am living my life on my terms, and I will not return to the cycle of exploitation and guilt. Sending it felt like cutting a final thread that had long tethered me to her toxicity. Legal developments continued to favor my autonomy. The bank confirmed that all procedures were correctly documented, and my rights as co-signer were intact. Rebecca's attempts to intervene legally were systematically countered by the meticulous records I had maintained. Every interaction with social services, lawyers, and the bank underscored the importance of preparation, documentation, and self-assertion. I realized that empowerment was not only about fleeing from toxicity, but also about establishing clear boundaries and ensuring that those boundaries could not be breached. Amidst these external challenges, my inner life flourished. I began writing a detailed account of my experiences, not for Rebecca or David, but for other women trapped in cycles of emotional abuse. I documented every sacrifice, every manipulation, and every moment of realization and liberation. The process was cathartic. Each word written was an act of reclaiming my narrative, a declaration that my life belonged to me alone. I envision sharing these experiences in a book and through digital platforms, providing guidance and hope for those who might find themselves trapped as I once was. As the weeks passed, the positive feedback from my writing and small online blog contributions began to arrive. Women from around the world reached out, sharing their stories and expressing gratitude for my courage. Some were younger, trapped in similar patterns with adult children. Others were my age, finally finding the strength to assert their independence. The letters were a testament to the universal struggle of mothers who had given too much and demanded too little for themselves. I realized that my pain had a purpose beyond my personal liberation. It could illuminate a path for others to reclaim dignity, autonomy, and joy. Through this process, I discovered another profound truth. Freedom is not merely the absence of obligation, but the presence of opportunity. Opportunities to create, to learn, to nurture relationships based on mutual respect, and to finally engage with life on one's own terms. Switzerland, with its serene landscapes and vibrant expatriate communities, became the stage upon which I could rediscover these possibilities. Each hike, each painting, each conversation was a building block in the reconstruction of my self-esteem and identity. Months passed, and with each passing day, Rebecca's absence from my life became less of a loss and more of a relief. I had learned that love that demands constant sacrifice, that manipulates through guilt, and that refuses accountability is not love, it is control. I now understood that true liberation required the courage to sever ties with those who would exploit it, even when those ties were familial. This realization, though painful at first, became the foundation of my inner peace. By the time the Swiss spring had fully arrived, my life had transformed in ways I never imagined possible. Every morning the crisp mountain air invigorated me, and the tranquil lakes mirrored the clarity I now felt in my heart and mind. Gone were the constant anxieties about Rebecca's whims, the financial emergencies, and the emotional blackmail that had defined decades of my life. In their place was an overwhelming sense of control over my own destiny. I had discovered that the courage to set boundaries was not a one-time act but a lifestyle, a commitment to protecting my dignity and mental peace. The legal battles, though stressful at first, ended in my favor. With Anna guiding every step, I successfully reclaimed my initial $150,000 investment from the co-signed mortgage that had been Rebecca and David's financial safety net for far too long. The bank finalized the transfer into my Swiss account, adding the accrued interest that amounted to an additional $5,000. On top of that, the sale of my apartment in my hometown netted me $95,000 after expenses. For the first time in my life, I could look at my bank statements and feel the power of financial independence. No longer was my money an endless reservoir for others' irresponsibility. It was now a shield, a tool for freedom, and a testament to the life I had fought to reclaim. I celebrated this victory quietly but meaningfully. That evening I dined at my favorite lakeside restaurant, ordering a bottle of French champagne I had always dreamed of trying but never allowed myself to purchase. As I sipped the sparkling liquid, I reflected on the years of sacrifice, the emotional wounds inflicted by the children I had raised with love, and the countless moments I had spent second-guessing my worth. Every tear shed, every pang of guilt endured, every sleepless night wondering if I had failed as a mother, all of it had led me here, to a place where my happiness was no longer conditional on the approval of those who had exploited my love. It was during one of these reflective evenings that I decided to document my journey fully, not merely as a memoir, but as a practical guide for women trapped in similar toxic relationships with adult children. I wanted to create a roadmap for liberation, to provide strategies for recognizing emotional manipulation, setting boundaries, and reclaiming autonomy without guilt. Switzerland, with its serene environment and inspiring vistas, became the perfect backdrop for writing. My apartment overlooked rolling hills, flowering meadows, and snow-dusted peaks, a daily reminder that life, even after trauma and betrayal, could be breathtakingly beautiful. The writing process was both cathartic and empowering. I spent hours recalling painful memories, confronting the guilt I had internalized for decades, and transforming my anguish into lessons for others. I titled the manuscript "When Love Hurts: Freeing Yourself from Family Emotional Abuse After 70. Every chapter was designed to balance narrative with practical guidance, blending my personal story with actionable advice for women navigating similar storms. By writing, I reclaimed not just my past, but also my voice, the voice that had been silenced by manipulation, expectation, and feared as I submitted chapters to my editor, Bridget. She repeatedly expressed amazement at both my clarity and courage. "Julieta," she said one afternoon, "your story is more than just personal, it is universal. Millions of women will see themselves in your experiences, and your guidance will empower them to take control of their lives before it's too late." Her words affirmed that my journey, painful as it had been, had a purpose beyond my own liberation. I began to feel that the pain I had endured could now serve as a beacon for others, turning suffering into empowerment. While I immersed myself in writing, the aftermath of Rebecca's actions continued to unfold. Through Elvira, I learned that the foreclosure on Rebecca and David's house had been completed. The bank, following legal procedures, reclaimed the property, and they were forced to move into a smaller, more modest apartment across town. David finally secured a stable job in a factory, earning less than he had previously, but with consistency. Rebecca, stripped of financial control, returned to work after years of depending on my support. I felt no joy in their struggles, only a quiet satisfaction that life now mirrored the consequences of their decisions without my intervention to rescue them. It was a lesson they had never experienced before, one that I had long understood but could only impart by stepping away completely. During this period, I began receiving messages and letters from women around the world who had encountered my blog posts and initial writings. Women shared stories of adult children who demanded endlessly, sisters who manipulated through guilt, and daughters who threatened emotional withdrawal. The comments were filled with gratitude, validation, and solidarity. Many wrote of the courage they had found in my words to finally assert boundaries and reclaim their own lives. One woman from Spain explained that she had realized she was not a bad mother for refusing to finance her 35-year-old son's irresponsibility. Another from Mexico detailed how she had sold her large, burdensome house and moved into a smaller, self-sustaining apartment for the first time in decades, experiencing peace she had never known. These letters filled me with a sense of purpose and deepened my resolve to continue sharing my story. Perhaps the most touching messages came from women who recognized themselves in Rebecca's behavior. Andrea, a 30-year-old mother, wrote to me that after reading my book, she had realized she had been repeating toxic patterns with her own mother, treating her the way Rebecca had treated me. Her letter described tears, apologies, and a renewed commitment to change, a profound testament to the ripple effect of courage and awareness. Knowing that my pain and lessons could prevent similar emotional harm to other families made every tear shed, every moment of humiliation endured, and every confrontation with Rebecca's cruelty worthwhile. As my book neared completion, I began to experience another remarkable development: recognition and validation from former family members. David, my former son-in-law, sent an email acknowledging the injustice and manipulation he had witnessed, apologizing for his inaction, and expressing hope for my continued happiness. He admitted that he and the children had missed me and that Rebecca had misrepresented the truth to protect her own narrative. His words, though they could not erase the past, provided a measure of closure. For the first time, someone in the family recognized not only my suffering but also the generosity and love that had been exploited for years. This acknowledgement was further complemented by the understanding I gained from my grandchildren. 1 year after my book's publication, I received a physical letter from them. Written in the innocence of children, it explained that they now understood why I had left, expressed their love, and wished to visit me in Switzerland when they were older. Their simple, heartfelt words underscored that my decision, though painful, had been necessary for both my well-being and their future understanding of respect, love, and boundaries. I cried upon reading their letter, not in sorrow, but from the profound sense that my sacrifice had been meaningful in a broader context. Financially, my situation had reached unprecedented stability. With the foreclosure settlement, the sale of my apartment, and my ongoing investments in Switzerland, my net worth surpassed $500,000. I was living in comfort, pursuing passions, and surrounded by a network of friends who valued me for my character, not my utility. Each morning brought renewed joy and autonomy, each evening a quiet satisfaction in having reclaimed a life that had been stolen by obligation and manipulation. The mountains, lakes, and forests of Switzerland became the symbols of this liberation, a constant reminder of the freedom that comes when one prioritizes self-respect over conditional love. The culmination of these experiences led me to an understanding I had never fully grasped before. Liberation is not merely about escaping toxicity, but also about embracing growth, curiosity, and self-love. I no longer feared aging, dependency, or solitude. I embraced them as opportunities for self-expression, creativity, and meaningful connection. My art, writing, social engagements, and quiet moments of reflection were the testament to a life rebuilt deliberately and thoughtfully. By the time my book was published, it had already begun to inspire women internationally. Letters poured in, stories were shared, and I became a quiet figure in the movement toward empowering older women to reclaim agency in their lives. My narrative, forged from pain, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, became a blueprint for liberation. The courage to step away from Rebecca's toxicity had not only preserved my dignity, but it had also transformed my existence into one of influence, purpose, and respect. The days in Switzerland began to merge into a rhythm I had never imagined possible. Each morning, I awoke with a sense of anticipation rather than dread. The anxiety that had once defined my existence, the fear of endless demands, of angry calls from Rebecca, of urgent financial crises was gone. Instead, there was a quiet joy in the knowledge that every decision I made now was for me and no one else. The mountains outside my window stood as silent witnesses to my rebirth, and the lake near my apartment reflected a serenity I hadn't seen in decades. It was as though my soul had finally come home to itself. One crisp morning, as the spring sun glinted off the snow-capped peaks, I received a call from Elvira, my ever-loyal neighbor and confidant. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and mischief, a perfect reflection of the woman who had supported me through so much of my journey. "Julieta," she said, "you have to hear this. Rebecca lost the house. The bank finally foreclosed, and David couldn't stabilize his finances. They've moved to a small apartment across town. For the first time in years, they are facing the consequences of their own decisions." I felt a complex surge of emotions: satisfaction, relief, and a strange, quiet pride. For years, I had carried the weight of their irresponsibility, and now, for the first time, life was balancing itself in a way that felt just. I didn't gloat, but I allowed myself a small smile, a private acknowledgement that justice, however delayed, had its moment. Despite their struggles, I felt no resentment toward the children themselves. My anger had always been directed at the manipulation, the lack of empathy, and the exploitation. Seeing them face natural consequences without my intervention was not cruel. It was necessary. It was the only way they could understand the magnitude of the sacrifices I had made and the gravity of their actions. I realized that sometimes the ultimate lesson for others comes not from lectures or arguments, but from stepping away entirely, from allowing reality to unfold in its unfiltered form. Financial stability continued to grow. The foreclosure settlement had returned my initial $150,000 investment plus accrued interest, and the sale of my hometown apartment brought in another $95,000. My total assets now exceeded $500,000, a sum I had never imagined at this stage of life. The irony was not lost on me. Years of sacrifice and self-denial had finally culminated in a life that was not just stable but thriving. I could finally invest in passions and experiences rather than emergencies and crises. I took art classes in watercolor painting, attended German lessons thrice a week, and joined a book club of like-minded expatriates who appreciated conversation, culture, and genuine friendship. Every interaction reminded me that life could be rich, not because of material wealth alone, but because of freedom, respect, and autonomy. Meanwhile, the social worker from the American consulate finalized the evaluation regarding Rebecca's false claims of dementia. The report was unequivocal. I was in perfect mental health, fully capable of making informed decisions, and living independently in Switzerland. This official validation was more than a bureaucratic formality. It was a shield against manipulation, a confirmation that my choices were legitimate, and a warning to anyone who might attempt to undermine my autonomy. I felt empowered knowing that the record existed, that the system had recognized the truth, and that Rebecca's attempts to regain control through deceit had failed. Around this time, I began receiving letters from readers of my blog and early drafts of my book. Their stories mirrored mine in astonishing ways. Women who had sacrificed everything for ungrateful children, who had tolerated manipulation, who had been emotionally blackmailed for decades. Their letters were filled with gratitude, relief, and inspiration. One woman from Spain wrote about how she finally refused to finance her 35-year-old son's irresponsibility, understanding for the first time that self-destruction is not a requirement for maternal love. Another from Mexico described selling her large, burdensome house and moving to a smaller apartment she could afford independently, experiencing peace she had never known. I read each letter with a swelling heart, knowing that my journey had transformed not only my life but also the lives of countless others. The process of writing my book, When Love Hurts: Freeing Yourself from Family Emotional Abuse After 70, was both challenging and liberating. Every chapter demanded honesty, every recollection of pain required courage, and every strategy one proposed for setting boundaries stemmed from my lived experience. I wanted to provide a roadmap for liberation, to equip women with the tools to recognize manipulation, assert independence, and reclaim their lives without guilt. Switzerland, with its tranquility, became the perfect backdrop for this work. My mornings were spent writing by the lake, the gentle waves and bird songs inspiring clarity of thought and depth of reflection. The act of documenting my journey was therapeutic, turning decades of suffering into a legacy of empowerment. 3 months after submitting the manuscript, Brigitte, my editor, called with the news that the book had been accepted and would soon be published. Her excitement was contagious. "Julieta," she said, "this book will touch lives across Europe and beyond. Emotional abuse by adult children is rarely discussed openly, and your story is both a personal testimony and a practical guide. You are going to help thousands of women understand that it is never too late to reclaim your life." I felt a deep sense of purpose, realizing that the pain I had endured could now serve as a beacon for others. While my professional and personal growth soared, my relationships with the family I had left behind remained complex. David reached out, acknowledging the mistreatment I had endured, admitting that he had witnessed Rebecca's manipulations but lacked the courage to confront them. His words, though they could not undo the past, provided validation and a sense of closure. The grandchildren, now 12 years old, sent a handwritten letter expressing understanding, love, and a desire to visit me when they were older. Their drawings depicted me smiling in the mountains, a visual representation of joy and freedom. I cried, not out of sadness, but from the deep emotional release that comes from knowing that distance and boundaries had not severed the love between generations entirely. As months turned into a year, my life solidified into a pattern of growth, reflection, and fulfillment. I attended cultural events, traveled within Switzerland, and immersed myself in the expat community. Every day was an opportunity to learn, to connect, and to expand horizons that had long been constrained by the demands of toxic relationships. Financial independence allowed me to explore passions I had postponed for decades, from painting and literature to culinary arts and travel. The wealth I had accumulated was secondary to the invaluable richness of freedom, dignity, and peace of mind. Reflecting on the past, I realized the transformative power of saying no and walking away. By removing myself from Rebecca's sphere of control, I had not only safeguarded my mental and financial well-being, but also allowed life to teach its hardest lessons to those who had taken me for granted. The experience underscored an essential truth: love does not require self-destruction, and boundaries are acts of care for both oneself and others. The culmination of these experiences inspired the final chapters of my book. I documented strategies for identifying manipulation, establishing healthy boundaries, and building a support network outside the family unit. I shared anecdotes of courage, reflection, and practical steps for achieving autonomy at any age. My goal was to transform pain into empowerment, to help women recognize that liberation is not selfish, but necessary for a fulfilled, dignified life. 3 years after that fateful birthday, the day Rebecca told me she wished I would die, I sat on my balcony in Zurich, looking at the mountains with a sense of completion. I was 75 years old, financially secure with over $600,000 in assets, the author of a best-selling book, and surrounded by a network of friends and admirers who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I had inner peace, dignity, and freedom. My disappearance from Rebecca's life had been the ultimate gift I could give myself. She had lost the mother who had sacrificed endlessly, but I had gained the life I had always deserved. My disappearance was not an act of cruelty, but a declaration of self-respect, a step toward a life of fulfillment and joy. Looking back, every tear, every moment of pain, every sacrifice had been a stepping stone to rebirth. I realized that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let go completely, to sever toxic ties, and to reconstruct your life with intention, courage, and love for yourself. The journey had been long and arduous, but the reward, a life rich in freedom, dignity, and self-realization, was beyond measure. As I reflected, I received a small envelope in the mail. Familiar handwriting brought a smile to my face before I even opened it. Inside was a letter from my grandchildren. Their words, written with honesty and innocence, expressed understanding, love, and admiration. They acknowledged why I had left, celebrated my bravery, and promised to visit when they were older. I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, proof that boundaries and distance, when exercised with love, do not sever the bonds that truly matter. I wrote back immediately, affirming my love and encouraging them to understand the power of respect, boundaries, and self-care. That night I looked out over the lake, the mountains bathed in moonlight. The reflections shimmered like the countless moments of clarity I had experienced since leaving my old life behind. For the first time, I felt the full measure of liberation. Financial stability, personal fulfillment, emotional peace, and the quiet knowledge that I had reclaimed my life from manipulation, cruelty, and expectation. My story had transformed not only my life but the lives of others, offering hope, guidance, and empowerment. Rebecca's request for me to disappear had been granted, not out of spite, but out of necessity. The life I built in Switzerland was a testament to courage, resilience, and the enduring power of self-respect. Every brushstroke in my paintings, every word in my book, every smile shared with friends or strangers was a celebration of the woman I had become. I had been broken, humiliated, and manipulated, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and free. And so, on a perfect spring morning, I closed my journal, sipped my tea, and reflected on the journey. From the humiliation of a cruel birthday wish to the serenity of a life fully my own, I had traversed pain, betrayal, and self-doubt. I had reclaimed dignity, joy, and independence. I had learned that love, when misused, can become destructive, but courage, clarity, and boundaries can transform despair into liberation. I had become the woman I was always meant to be, and for the first time in 75 years, I felt whole, complete, and profoundly at peace. And that's my story, how a cruel birthday wish from my own daughter became the catalyst for a life I never imagined I could live. From despair, manipulation, and endless sacrifice, I built freedom, peace, and happiness in Switzerland. I proved that it's never too late to reclaim your life, set boundaries, and prioritize your own dignity. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your peace? Or do you know someone trapped in a toxic family dynamic? Share your story in the comments. I read every one of them and your experiences matter. If this story inspired you, give it a super thanks to support more life-changing stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story of courage, betrayal, and triumph. Two other stories I highly recommend are on your screen now. Real-life journeys that will make you cry, laugh, and feel empowered. Dive in, learn, and remember. Sometimes the bravest act of love is walking away. With respect, love, and hope for your own journey. See you in the next story.